Bacteria, bacteria, bacteria. Growing up, every time this word was mentioned, I would always attach it to something negative. Whether it was getting sick or just being afraid of these so-called germs, I never associated bacteria with anything other than something harmful. As a child, I was trained to take extra precautions to steer clear of bacteria, which I'm sure many others have as well. For example, most people are probably familiar with the proper way to address public door handles, and toilets. Or at least this is the way I've been taught. Bacteria has always had a negative notion around it, and people try to avoid it at all costs. But shockingly, most bacteria do not harm us, and some are actually helpful and beneficial to us. These tiny living particles are hardly talked about since negative bacteria always takes the spotlight. But humans are constantly interacting with good bacteria on a daily basis. Most people aren't aware bacteria play a key role in preserving the foods we eat and keeping our bodies healthy and working well. Since we always hear about the harmful bacteria, I've always wanted to uncover the other, more helpful side of these microbes. Most people find it more useful to have knowledge on bacteria that are able to harm us, so that they know what to look out for and how to protect themselves. However, I believe it is important to have a good understanding of all types of bacteria, since we wouldn't be able to survive without some of these helpful ones. During this video, we will explore 3 main ways bacteria help our bodies function and make things a little bit easier for us. First, let's look at fermentation and food preservation. A long time ago, before we could even read or write, our ancestors discovered a way to make many foods last for long periods of time. Since they had very little resources to begin with, this was very beneficial to them. You may ask, how is this possible? Well, surprisingly, bacteria makes this magic happen. Bacteria can undergo the process of fermentation. This means they can convert carbohydrates into lactic acid and release carbon dioxide without needing oxygen. This process is called anaerobic since it doesn't require oxygen. Bacteria aids in the process of making a variety of foods such as cheeses and breads. So how exactly does this work? Let's start with cheese. As you may know, cheese starts off as milk, but in order to convert this milk to cheese, some helper bacteria is needed. We add what is called starter bacteria at the beginning of the cheese making process. This bacterium is able to acidify the milk, which helps separate the milk into solid curds and liquid whey, which is a major step in cheese making. Lactobacillus and Lactococcus are 2 main types of bacteria that aid in this process. These bacteria are referred to as lactic acid bacteria, or LAB, and their primary energy source is lactose, which is the sugar in milk. These microbes metabolize this sugar and produce lactic acid, which lowers the milk's pH. From here, many other ingredients like enzymes and proteins finish up the job. Now, onto bread, specifically sourdough bread. I'm sure you've heard yeast is involved when making bread, but did you know bacteria is also an important ingredient? Once again, the bacterium Lactobacillus is a great helper when it comes to sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is a mixture of flour, water, yeast, and lactic acid bacteria. Yeast and lactobacillus can convert maltose, which is another type of sugar found in flour, into carbon dioxide and alcohol. The accumulation of carbon dioxide is what makes the bread rise. The bacteria will also produce lactic acid, which contributes to the sour taste of the bread. Although bacteria can be helpful in some foods, unfortunately, they can spoil others. When preserving foods, our goal is to make conditions unfavorable for bacteria to grow. For example, when preserving meats. When trying to preserve meat, we put salt on it. We do this because salt inhibits the growth of threatening microorganisms, such as bacteria, who can spoil the food. The salt on the meat causes the water in bacterial cells to pass through the membrane of the cell. This is because water will always flow to the higher solute concentrated area to keep the sodium concentration balanced inside and outside of the cell. So, in this case, water will flow out of the cell. This concept is called osmosis. The bacterial cells will become dehydrated from this process, shrivel up, and die. I have always been curious about this process of curing meats because my grandfather does this every year. I've helped him make these delicious meats my whole life, but I was never aware of how this process actually worked. Here's a picture of him salting the meat to keep all the unwanted bacteria away. And this is the final product. Now, let's look at the human microbiome. So, what is the human microbiome? Well, this is the 10 to 100 trillion living organisms that live in and on our bodies. Even though we aren't aware of all these tiny organisms, they play important roles in our bodies to keep us healthy, and we couldn't live without them. Sometimes they cause sickness, but most of the time, they live in harmony with us. Everyone has their own unique set of microbes, and some may have more than others. Your microbiome is influenced by your diet and what you're exposed to. But one key microbe which contributes a lot to our human microbiome is bacteria. In fact, there are 10 times more bacterial cells than there are human ones in our bodies. We depend on bacteria to help us degrade food to provide us with the nutrients we need, and they also help fight off unwanted visitors. Bacteria is most abundant in the gut, but it can also be found in your mouth, nose, ears, and skin. Lactic acid bacteria and bifidobacteria are two main types of bacteria found in our digestive tract. There are some foods like starch, which our bodies may have trouble breaking down. The bacteria will encounter this starch, which is an energy source for them, and it will metabolize it and break it down. The bacteria will release this broken down starch, which can now easily be used by our bodies. Starch isn't the only thing bacteria can break down for us, though. We have a diverse collection of bacteria which can also break down fibers, sugars, and even poisons. Bacteria is also able to destroy some disease-causing cells, including their relatives, bad bacteria, which are part of the human microbiome as well. Bacteria can protect the intestinal cells from invading pathogens, and they also promote tissue repair. Now, sometimes people lack some beneficial bacteria in their bodies, and when we don't have the right balance of bacteria, our bodies may not be as healthy. So luckily, we have ways to replenish or add to our human microbiome. We can change our diet or take probiotic supplements to increase the diversity and amount of good bacteria in our bodies. There are many foods which are high in beneficial bacteria. We call these probiotic foods. For example, dairy products such as cheese or yogurt or sourdough bread are considered to be probiotic. As we learned before, these food products are made with many types of good bacteria, so eating them would promote and introduce more bacteria into our diet. There are also probiotic supplements which come in the form of a pill. These pills contain a variety of microorganisms, including bacteria, which can be taken to add to your diet. Usually, we will find that probiotic supplements contain lactobacillus and bifidobacteria since they have such a large contribution to our digestive tract. It's truly amazing to discover all of the things good bacteria are able to provide us with. Even though it is definitely important to have knowledge on negative bacteria, it is also useful to be aware of the positive effects it has on our daily lives too. Everyone always talks about bacteria getting us sick or how it hurts us in some way, but most bacteria help us rather than harm us. Bacteria was alive before we were, and they hold an important part in our survival. Since my dream is to become a medical professional one day, I feel that it's important to understand all aspects of how we interact with bacteria. This knowledge will enable me to educate and help future patients and the people around me. I hope this video helps people realize bacteria shouldn't always be seen as negative, and overall, bacteria is a beneficial component to one's needs and health.